I think one thing that's slowing down some of these lectures is all this animation, because these lectures were originally intended for an in-class lecture, so I'll try to speed it up. But what impacts distribution? And so things like my communication, my relationship, and all these factors go into the decisions I need to make with my distribution. And so the question is, how do I make it a strategic advantage? How do I make this flow between me and the customer go well? And so all of these factors, you can just read it on your own. I think it's pretty straightforward. Factor into it. And so the interactions I do have with my customers, these are called the touch points. And so you have to think about how often and in what way do I want to. Like, do I do it by email? Should I do it in person? And there's a cost associated with all this. And so how do I go about targeting it? This is the age of personalization. How do I make it personal? It's richness and reach. Not only that, do my messages resonate with my customer? Meaning, does it want them to do something? And am I responsive enough to them? And these are all the things that when you look at your distribution channel, you need to do. And so the big elements that go into making a channel in terms of you executing on it is who is going to rule over it, who owns it, and what agreements do you have. Are you going to do it directly, dealing with the customer? Are you going to do it indirectly? And what is it going to cover? And so what I mean by coverage is it intensive, selective, or exclusive? And what we mean by is intensive means that I just ship a lot of this stuff. Selective means that it's going to like specific places, like brand shops. And exclusive means that I'm not really big on logistics because I'm not sending that out that many to begin with. So it's more about having a specialty channel. And so this goes into how much market I have to coverage, and also, do I have intermediaries? Do I have a few or do I have a lot? And so, what about middlemen? Well, middlemen can be extremely useful, and the reason why, and one of the biggest reasons why you go through middlemen, is they have the infrastructure in place, and instead of you having to build a sales organization or have to deal with buildings and leases and stuff like that, or have to build websites that no one may ever come to. You use people like Amazon or whatever because they're already out there, and it can end up being cheaper in the long run. The cons are, guess what? They're taking a chunk of your profit, and that's one of the biggest problems with it. And then, not only that, but say you're in Costco. Is Costco going to promote you? No, probably not. You're just item 1 out of 10,000 items. And so you're not special. So maybe you're better off just trying to promote yourself online where you get a traction. And so those are the pros and cons of middlemen. In terms of designing it, what are your goals? Of course, your bottom line goal is profit, but you might have other goals. And again, when you look at a business, it's about your strategy, your market, and your product. What processes are you going to put in place in order to execute those goals? And finally, what outcomes do you want? Essentially, what are the metrics that you're most interested in? And so, what is the design process for this? What are my goals? What are my options? What are the trade-offs? I need to go experiment with it, or is there data exists that's similar to what I'm doing? Again, analogies are very powerful. What do I keep and drop, and how do I manage the churn? Meaning, I'm going to lose customers along the way, so I'm going to have to replace them. And if I want growth, then I got to be bringing in more customers than I'm losing, and that's what we refer to as the churn. In terms of implementing distribution, it can be very complex. It could be competitive, meaning your channels can fight against each other because you've got a good product and they want to sell it. And so how do you balance all of this together? How do you split up the pie so it's fair between everyone? And so one of the big fights in a distribution structure is between verticals and horizontals. Verticals are the steps in your sales process. For example, going from manufacturing to sales support. Your horizontals are all the people who do something in the same level. For example, in sales, I could have partners who are selling my product. I could be selling it through retail outlets, resellers, or I could be selling it online. Guess what? All three of those guys are going to compete. When I sell it directly, that's direct. Indirect means I'm selling through another party. How much am I going to own? What are the trade-offs, and how do I manage it? Those are the challenges for you in terms of managing a distribution structure. But it's complicated. These are the main issues that you need to deal with. Logistics versus information. Are you a company that's more about the whole mechanisms of getting it to them? And that's typically when you're talking about a lot of manufacturing, or like I'm selling toilet paper nationally, so I got to get it all over the place. We're talking about, millions of rolls of paper and everything else. Or am I about information? Meaning, I have a software product. Software requires education. So who's going to send my message? Who's going to do the training? I'm more information-based. Are the principals involved? Is it more about manufacturers, or is it more about distributors? Meaning, if I'm building, say, tires or something like that, maybe I should ship it just directly from the factory. Or do I need to go through distributors? And in terms of managing this, it's about power versus control. What power is that I can actually do something to affect what goes on, meaning I could reward people or I could coerce people. On the other hand, I may not have enough money or whatever to do that, so therefore I need to maintain control, build relationships. And so that's the big challenge for you. And all three of these challenges and trade-offs come on your verticals and your horizontals. And so in terms of information, the primary information you're giving is like training, quality assurance, comparisons. You want to control the communication. You want to control the viewpoint of it because you want to set the reference points. And personalization. Again, if you go through third parties, are they really going to be able to speak to your product better than you will? And so this is what's involved in logistics, basically getting the raw materials and transporting things and warehousing things. And so can you meet the demands of an order? And it becomes very important. American Biophysics once had a revenue of $70 million a year. They made mosquito traps. And what they did is they decided they wanted to scale up. They wanted to be the mosquito trap for every household in the world. And so they decided, hey, let's go to China. Well, this is a problem. Their company was full of biologists. And they didn't know anything about manufacturing. And so they went to China. They wasted a lot of money. They didn't know what they were doing. They flopped and they fell apart. And so what ended up happening is they got bought up on the cheap because they were going under. And so logistics isn't sexy. Logistics, quite frankly, I think it's boring. But don't tell that to my doctoral roommate because he's a guru in a supply chain. But anyway, it counts and it matters. And so in terms of your offering, is it about information or is it about logistics? And so what is your product more about? And you have to manage that. And so in terms of demand for information versus for demand for logistical service, depending on whether or not it's high or low, that pretty much points you in the direction of what kind of sellers that you want. And naturally, when you talk about things like high for information or something like that, the question is that really comes out of this is, how much do I need in the terms of people? Because if I need people services, it becomes more expensive. For example, you can buy cars online, but in general, sooner or later, you're going to interact with the person, whether it's to fill out paperwork or whatever. And that's sales items that big cost that much. When I think about, should I sell it myself digitally, or should I go through intermediaries, like sell through Walmart or Costco? And so here are all the trade-offs. And there are certain advantages with resellers. On the other hand, there are certain advantages doing it on your own. But the problem with resellers is there's a significant cost to you. And so there's no right or wrong answer. You have to choose for your own company what works best. And so the thing that drives all of this is customers are really demanding today. Because of the internet, they're well informed, they know all about you, and so that puts the onus on you to be better. Innovation is constantly creating new ways we can do things. Are you taking advantage of it? And not only that, but you make these relationships, but there's a lot of competition inside, and you have to manage this conflict. And that's a very big part of distribution. And so other things we take into consideration is our strategy. Lock in and lock out. Is a reseller really going to be that interested in protecting my position? Probably not. Are there legal constraints you have to take into consideration? That's actually a big deal. This is part of the reason for example, there's a lot of medical regulations. And so this is why people like to go through second parties, because they already have all the certifications, they know the law and everything else, and you don't. So instead of spending all that money getting up to speed, have somebody who's already good at it doing it. And then what are your constraints? How many people do you need? Do I need tools? And so your options are either to sell directly or sell through indirect channels. And so you have to make those decisions. Which works better for your particular product? What aligns better? And so in the next video, we'll talk about how this whole system operates.